Hey, folks, and welcome back for another week, another episode of Riftbound 101. It's episode 29, and this is going to be a bit of a tasting platter of an episode. I did not get a chance to record two last week due to work commitments, and so I find myself in a weird spot where I have to cover for one and, merge it a little bit. So, what I'm going to be doing today is an Annie and Misfortune rundown very quickly and a Sunset episode for Origins. And these are going to be mixed up together. They're sort of sequenced in a way that makes sense to me, but this is not going to be an in focus episode for Annie or an in focus episode for MF. Although I'll be talking a little bit about why I think they remain good legends in set two and what's kind of happening with set two. But I'll also be talking, I think, a little bit about the design direction of the game, the sort of burgeoning, new environment that we're in now. We're fully in Spirit Forged, and kind of what's coming up for the rest of the year. So this is going to be kind of a state of the game episode, kind of an in focus episode, and kind of a bit of a theory episode, merging all three. So hopefully a little bit of everything for everyone. So yeah, I want to do an OGN Sunset discussion, and then I'm going to talk about where I think Annie and MF sort of fit in terms of the meta that's closing out and the one that's shaping up, and what their strengths are. And then I want to talk a little bit about the Spirit Forge shakeup overall before really taking a long view of the year that's ahead of us, right? We're in February, but a lot of this stuff is coming at us pretty fast if you actually take a look at the calendar. So there are some things that I think bear discussion in terms of how Origins shaped up as a first set. This is for many folks who are on this channel, your first TCG. For a lot of us, it's not. We've seen a lot of different TCGs, and there are some interesting aspects about the design philosophy of Riftbound that creates new opportunities for success and divergence from established TCG formulas. And there are also some hiccups that I think are becoming more and more evident as we move into Spirit Forged. And I think this is a good time to voice concerns without, really like banging the pots and pans, at least on my end. These are, for a lot of folks, what I would consider, growing pains. And whether or not we emerge out of this period with fruitful metagame or something a bit more constrained, I think is going to have a lot to do with the competitive circuit. So, if you look at the first, like the landing page for the game, I think the design philosophy that's communicated is actually pretty interesting. A strategic card game where champions fight for control of battlefields. So you've got champions, you've got battlefields, and you've got combat. And this tracks if any of you have played Legends of Runeterra before, where combat was also, like unit-based combat, was also a very big pillar of that game. Now, this is not unlike a game like Netrunner, where you also have to score points to win, but it is a symmetrical game to some extent, and it's not a life point total game like Magic the Gathering, nor is it a point salad game like Gwent, for example. So there is a prevalence of needing to be on board and needing units to work. And I think that is really at the heart of, the discussion that's happening around like what cards we want in the game or not. Now, if you look at the actual like win rate matrix for Origins, and this is at this point, like I would say about as good as we can hope to get, given when Riftx started calculating their win rate percentage. I think it's still like super small sample size, but one of the interesting aspects of this is there are only like 3 decks that have positive win rates. And if you're somebody who looks at Magic the Gathering, you might notice that these are like pretty low. I think in Magic, if you had 2 decks with 57% win rate in a lot of fields, you would say those are good decks, but they're not crazy decks. And especially in the hands of good players, those look like average decks. Master Yi at 53, I think, is like a bit under par. The kinds of stats that I'm used to is like 55 is a base value, even though you would say like all things equal, one player loses, one player wins. It's always 50%. The idea is like good players will tend to win a little bit more on average. But then things kind of drop off a cliff, right? Victor 45, MF 48, Set Timo 45, and Ari 40. Out of the some 16 or so legends, this means really only 8 are seeing like play with a sufficient number of parses. I would say like I'm actually surprised Yasuo is not played more, but it is what it is. And realistically, what you notice when you look at the heroes that are or the legends that are performing well is both Kaisa and Annie start to showcase deck builds that kind of ignore unit-based combat as much as possible or try to solve it deterministically. So what I mean by deterministic is you will hold on to hands or combinations of cards that will allow you to effectively forecast a winning game state for yourself or to exit, the calculus of regular combat. And that's, very different than something like Timo or Ari that is holding up a lot of combat math spells and hidden cards that are trying to solve combat math on the fly. Likewise, Master Yi is doing something a bit different. And so all three of these decks are playing to the strengths of the colors as they were envisioned, right? If we're talking about design philosophy, I think it is interesting that we have one red-blue, one red-purple, and one green-orange deck, right? So red, common denominator color, aggression, conquer, and straight damage, right? And in one case, it's paired with blue so that you get access to tricks and draw and some forecasting and big spells. And in another case with purple, not really for discard or hidden, but really for card selection and one specific case of interacting with trash. Now, Master Yi is a bit different, mostly because what you are getting is negation and ramp, I would say are like the two main pillars. But you might notice yellow is kind of not part of this equation almost at all. And that is fairly telling. Small tokens, I think wide boards, holding. These are strategies that are intended to be part of the game, but are currently not functioning, I think, to the degree that they were intended to. So if you look at Kaisa has, I think, strong aggression matched with draw, both in the champion spell in the suite of cards in the deck. And you have big spells like Acathian Rain, and increasingly the slower versions favor things like Time Warp and Singularity, buttressed with small units like Pouty Poro and Raven Bloom. And the legend just gives you inherent resource discounts, right? So you're not getting ahead on resources, but you are hemorrhaging less of them over time. So aggression, draw, resource. Then you take a look at Annie. You get, I think, even stronger aggression matched with some card draw, but mostly card selection with stacked deck. And with Merchant and Zon Warrens and all that kind of stuff. Instead of getting resource discounts, you're getting resource advantage. So Annie pseudo ramps you by 2 runes, and you get inevitable point pressure to end the game. So you're getting draw, resource, and aggression. And then lastly, Master Yi plays a bit differently, but I think really showcases a very similar approach to core fundamentals of the game. You ramp a ton to get access to either your mid-range version units or your Aurora, and you get draw, and you get interaction in the likes of Charm and Challenge and Sabotage, and then you get your ginormous units, which are your game enders. So you get resources, draw, and instead of aggression, in this case, you are trying to go for the large unit. But realistically, what this means is that colors that cannot access either resources or draw are already disadvantaged, and color combinations that can't do both reliably are disadvantaged outright. And then we enter into discussions about relative speed that we've had on past episodes, and we are going to talk about relative speed in, I think, maybe a week or two. But really, you can see kind of a rock, paper, scissors, triangle, where these three decks are all three accessing a different economy for the game altogether, which yellow just can't access. Order is not doing this kind of game. And when it does do so, it does so on the back of cards like Kaisa or maybe Baited Hook. And killing Hidden Blade is not, there is a cost associated with drawing 2 cards, and setup is not as easy. Now, I'm not going to be talking about set today, and I think set is really kind of a very specific intervention into this meta that solves some problems regarding Master Yi and Kaisa, but overall tends to have a pretty obnoxious matchup into Annie. If Colin's watching this, then I'm happy saying that you are the person who can pilot a set deck to a win. But as some of the recent tournament showings are telling us, that's not really the case anymore. So this was kind of the OGN sort of situation, right? And this really leads to a lesson learned from set 1, which is that aggression is rewarded, and sneaking points or using removal to guarantee those points is the better strategy. You do not want decks that play fair. So things like Ari and even Teemo, which I think is relatively fair, Yasuo, Garen, God forbid, these are decks that are trying to build linear boards and get value out of trades. And if you're playing something like Jinx, then you're even more honest. You're just trying to play a very aggressive, assertive strategy. And these decks will just outvalue you across the board. These are like, this is the reason why cards like Kaisa Survivor retain their value, or cards like Time Warp do, because they fundamentally either fulfill multiple roles or they change the mechanics of the game altogether. So if the goal of this game is to encourage, combat on battlefields with interaction, what we've been seeing is that the decks that succeed are the ones that do that the least, or that are trying to abscond from combat. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. Among these, I think one of the interesting developments of OGN was Annie, because decks like Kaisa and Master Yi still had to trade somewhat with spells, and they had to produce damage to expel units out of the board. Now, if you look at the Rift deck's popularity scale, we can already see that Rebuke, Fight or Flight, and Ride are like played to crazy extents as a stack deck. And then it's followed by Kaisa, and, up and coming Brynhir Thundersong, a card that literally shuts off your opponent's capacity to play during your turn. And then cards like Darius and Noxian Hopeful, who are turboing out value or are getting discounted. So these are, I think, exemplary. We have 2 spells that are effectively undercosted, super aggressive removal or save spells. Ride is functionally counter magic, but also a card that lets you score twice on an opponent's turn, depending on how things work out. Yeah, well, once for sure. 2 if you can double it up or anything, but during your turn as well, you can do some stuff. Stack deck, the brainstorm of this game, a card that in Magic has been a perennial inclusion. Obelisk, I think, is an interesting card to see there. Mostly it produces some weird math, and then Dreaming Tree as well. So what you're seeing is why I think purple-red as a combination is as strong as it is, which is it just gets access to some of the best spells in the game and some of the best units in the game, and it also fundamentally plays a different game altogether by producing points during an opponent's turn, or by completely removing your opponent's capacity to play cards out of their preferred windows. So you could say, well, okay, play Bryn here. You can still play things like Rebuke, but it will stop most of green combat spells, and in some cases also orange spells. So this is a good indication of why Annie, I think, has shot up and become increasingly popular in the West, and also why it eked out a win at the 4th China Regional recently. And this is going to be like my micro Annie discussion, right? So I mentioned Annie gets access to a lot of aggression and a lot of point compression and good draw. But I think Annie's ability is just perennial, right? Getting access to 2 runes is very good. And so doing that is equivalent to drawing a card that gives you 2 runes every turn, which is far superior to what Jinx gives you in terms of card advantage or resources. And the deck doesn't require you to do anything. In fact, it rewards you for playing the best cards in the game. Rebuke, Foff, Ride, Stack Deck, Flash. These are all amazing cards that are all 2 or less energy that Annie gets to play reasonably well. And that's really the key here, right? Like Annie is capitalizing on a good combination of colors. Now, if you want to see a deck list for the current season, this is the Nanjing regional win. And if you look at it, you're going to notice that this deck has not changed all that much with the arrival of Spirit Forged. I think the notable cards are Ferris Forerunner, which is a truly obnoxious card that will let you hold onto points and then reconquer pretty easily. And sometimes you'll also punish your opponent for it. And then cards like Hard Bargain, which make the Kaisa matchup much more favorable. In fact, all spell-based matchups are more favorable when you have access to Hard Bargain. And then Red Draven, which is just like the new flavor small to mid-sized unit that is like super good and gets you treasure that pays for your spells, so you're getting access to like kind of like Kaisa legend ability. Switcheroo, another combat trick that is like very high impact. And then lastly, I would say card to consider is Rengar, and I think Blevins on the most recent Turn 'em Sideways pod talked about Rengar, and as did Casanova. The idea is that like you can play reaction speed Rengar even when you're not attacking, and this actually makes you a bit better into rebuke hands, and it will create certain situations that are like pretty annoying for your opponent. So Rengar, I think in pretty much every other deck is not that good, but in Annie has a space as like a one of that's they need to respect. And the story is that red purple just kind of got better, and there's a case that Annie is a side grade slight downgrade to Draven, but you get to do some different things in terms of like playing 3-0 Flash, for example. You also have MF, kind of not discussed recently. I think there's a lot more Sivir Aurora going on in the meta, and I think some people were asking me, well, why aren't you talking about Sivir Aurora? And here I'll point you to the most recent Challenger TCG video where Anton Villanera was talking about MF still being one of the best options for Aurora. And I think if you look at this, this was the top placing from the Nanjing regional tournament. You're going to notice that, again, not quite that much has changed, with the exception that now these decks get to run Shovel, Last Rites, which lets you recur Mind Splitters and Dead Blooms, and effectively just like act as pseudo copies of your only creatures that you really care about. So this deck went from playing some clunkers to just only playing like the best purple and the best orange bodies. And then instead of getting access to gold and the capacity to effectively like bushwhack or mobilize your units, you get access to bullet time. So the deck plays a more controlling game, and you get access to board removal, which I think is more essential. And the other star of this is gank, is the ability to give your big unit ganking during your turn. So let's say you play Aurora, you drop Dead Bloom, next turn you give it ganking, you get to like conquer the second spot, and then you just get to do that every turn. You hold, score 1, gank the other battlefield. And this is how you like actually win the game. I think Sivir is interesting and people are excited because it's a new hero, but I think once your Aurora's on the board, this deck doesn't really care all that much about having access to runes, and you get to dump them all with bullet time, which Sivir really doesn't get to do. So you might ask, well, why is that so important? Well, bullet time actually is somewhat useful against mid-range Draven, but especially against Miracle decks that are going to be dumping a ton of units on the board. You burn 6 runes, and you can actually like board wipe your opponent, and that's going to matter somewhat. So MF, I think, in a declining deck archetype for sure, but still probably the best version of this. I would say this went from being like an A tier deck to something like a B minus tier deck. It just unfortunately is not playing the game that the good purple decks are playing, the quote unquote good decks. So these decks developed, I think, out of the Western meta's approach to looking at decks like Kai'Sa and Yi and saying, well, what if instead of being red blue and orange green, these were orange purple and red purple? And this should tell you something that's happening, which is pretty much everyone is trying to jam purple cards into multiple decks. And if you look at this deck, for example, you're going to notice stack decks. You're going to notice Foff. You're going to notice Call Shot and Last Rites. If I go back to Annie, you're going to notice Foff, Rebuke, stack deck, Hard Bargains, and yeah, also in the side for this, Rides and Rebukes. So we've kind of like gone off of even doing like Vi Ride the Wind, and now we are just settling into like purple good stuff decks. And so when we look at what's happening with Spirit Forged, and I had an episode about 2 weeks ago where I was talking about like the discourse around Draven being banned and whether or not that's going to like fix things. I want to be super clear that I think like Draven is 100% the best deck. I think there are like 2 versions of Draven. They're both like deck 1 and deck 2. And even if they were banned, we would still be left with a problem, which is the purple package just is playing a more efficient, lean, and high-speed version of the game than what some of the other colors can do. So if you look at the meta distribution for Spirit Forge currently, this is from China, so obviously things will differ going forward. Some NA or global events like the Rift and Runes event that just happened. But we're talking about, 350 some Draven decks that are present at these events. Irelia in second place, Kai'Sa third, Fiora on the rise up, but a bit less, and then Ezreal in fifth. Then if we convert this and we look at the, top placing events, so like the 3-star events, like the regionals, Draven even more represented. And I want to be clear, there's been somewhat of a decline in Draven that I think is getting people to be optimistic about what's happening to the meta. Part of that is because there are metal cards to chase, and people already have their qualifications for the Chinese national. So people started swapping off of Draven. And then I also think that people just got tired of playing it once they were done. And so if you're trying to, there's no prizing really that you're going to get access to, you're going to decide to play some other decks. So much stronger concentration of Draven, similar concentration of Irelia, which indicates to you that in large events, the other heroes are the ones that aren't seeing that much play. And Ezreal, I think, drops to 6th place behind Victor. Victor really played as a counter deck to Draven. Unfortunately, Victor has one problem, which is he has like a pretty good round 1 into Draven. If the Draven is teched properly, Victor loses a ton of points, but Victor just gets clobbered by Miracle decks. And I think that's actually like the main problem right now is that there are actually like 2 Draven decks that are merged into like one stat, right? When you're looking at like the Draven meta, it's actually like 2 different decks. But the thing that I want to focus on more is really the fact that like 35% of decks are chaos based. So this means at really like a base level, if your deck loses to cards like Rebuke or Foff, 1/3 of your matches are already like kind of toast. And I don't think you can play a tournament like that. So this means that the meta, my suspicion for the West is going to be that any event that has cash prizing or that is a quali or a regional is going to see a high preponderance of purple decks. And we're going to have, I think, a discussion in a couple of weeks about whether or not the numbers are acceptable. I'm making this video like 4 days before Bologna, so by next week I might have a different version about this. But currently, it really does feel like your deck should be playing Rebuke and Flight and Fight or Flight, or should be at least resilient to it in some way. If you look at the Rift and Runes event that just happened this weekend, top 8, we had 4 Dravens outright, 2 Ezreals, and 1 Sivir Aurora. And then we had 1 deck that was not playing purple. We had Fiora. And the Fiora was mid-range. We can have some discussions about whether mid-range or Beta Hook are better. I'm on the Hook train, but it is what it is. And I want to highlight that Colin Kaiser, who won a bunch of events on set last set, and Prismat, who was the best playing Teemo player, are both on Draven. Colin's on mid-range and Prismat's on Miracle. And the game really is like Miracle Draven clobbers everything that's not presumably like mid-range Draven, and maybe some versions that are running like unchecked power of blue decks, but they're so rare. So realistically, what's happening is one version of Draven is thinning out the field, and then it runs into mid-range Draven, and mid-range Draven is favored into Miracle Draven. And I would also say that Miracle Draven, in general, I think is a much more taxing deck to play, and it's a lot harder to pilot. So what tends to happen is, for anybody who's done long-term events, if you are like note-taking a lot, like Randy was doing on Miracle Sivir, these are decks that get like very onerous to play when you're on hour 5-6, and you run into somebody who is slightly more rested, and it's already like an unfavorable matchup. You're likely to lose out. And so if you want to watch the Rift and Runes event, there's actually a match between Prismat and Colin where you can kind of see this happening. But realistically, this event, which was a cash event and was not subject to the sort of medal leader prizing that we've seen in China for the last couple of weeks, kind of showcased what I think is going to be happening on day 2 of the Bologna regional, which is going to be like just purple all the way down. I would expect out of top 64 for about 50 to 55 decks to be purple. And I would not be surprised to have like a 6 out of 8 Draven top 8. I'm happy to be wrong if that's the case. But the trends and the way that the meta has been shaking up really seem to indicate that like purple best color pretty undividedly. And so, going back to the design philosophy that we were talking about earlier, I feel like what the game is trending towards is a game where avoiding combat is the best thing to do, especially against Draven, a legend that produces value from even engaging you in combat on the ground. So yeah, this is kind of the Bologna, I think, discussion. And also, I want to be super clear that like there are prizes that are not medal leader prizes. So like people are going to be playing for qualies, for worlds, and they're going to be playing for like these mats and these cards, which I'm personally a big fan of the Blade of the Ruined King mat. But this is going to be like kind of a bloodbath. I think. Yeah. So then the question is, why Draven? Because I'm talking about Draven being strong and purple being strong, and I think if I go back to the rubric earlier, it becomes like pretty easy to spot, right? Draven accesses draw and card selection. So you get that through the legend, you get that through stack deck, you get that through basically all of your removal spells producing cards. And you also get resources because the Draven champion unit produces gold. Then you are rewarded for aggression. Pretty much your entire deck loves to fight or be on point, and especially fighting at Reaver's Row just produces like insane math for you. And then you just get to access like some of the best units. So you just get to run Red Kaisa, You run one red Draven. You can run Darius's, although not all versions do. And then you get to run like Ferris Forerunner and a Mind Splitter, and you just get like the best of all worlds, realistically. You get to like cherry pick some of the best units from the Annie and Kaisa lists, as well as some of the best spells, and then you get some of the best spells from like MF or Aurora 2, and that's kind of just it. Now, I do want to be careful. This is a podcast or an episode series or whatever we want to call it, where I'm talking, a decent mix of competitive and casual and like card theory. So I would caution you, if you are like going to competitive events, especially if you're like in a Nexus Night League, or you're going to be planning on going to skirmishes for prizing, or especially if you're going to a regional, just be steeled that Draven will be one of the most represented decks, and you can probably expect something like a 3-to-1 mid-range to Miracle split. Outside of that, however, feel free to play a bunch of other decks, especially right now when people are buying up a lot of the cards to make Draven and some of the competitive decks for Bologna. You're likely to have a pretty chill first week, Nexus nights, maybe next week as well. And then you're going to find, I think, an increase in Dravens over the next couple of weeks, and then a decrease as we move towards the end of the meta. But like, especially if you are playing with friends that or you're playing at like small local shops, I would encourage you to like play other stuff to see how the game could be if like there was intervention, but also like be mentally prepared. It's a bit of both. Okay, so I kind of want to look forward after Spirit Forged, because I think Spirit Forged is, I mean, we're now in it, and I think the Draven panic is a bit real, but that doesn't mean that this is where the game stops. In fact, quite the opposite. We're about to get 3 more sets this year, one every 3 months or so. So presumably we're getting one in May, one in August, and one in November again. And matched with those, we are getting a pretty large competitive circuit for the year. And it's going to oscillate across a lot of different places. So we've got Vegas and Bologna and Vegas now. And we're going to get Lille and Atlanta in April, which I think are going to be like the tail end of the set 2 meta. Sydney is going to be pretty interesting. There is a high chance that Sydney will be, like Bologna, very close to the release of the next set. And then Vancouver, Utrecht, and Hartford for set 3. And then Barcelona, Singapore, Los Angeles for set 4. And then presumably like the first event of 2027 will be that as well. And so you can kind of split the year into quadrants, right? We have 4 Spirit Forge regionals, 4 for Unleashed, 4 for Vendetta, 1 that is not announced. And then Radiance, which comes out at the end of the year, will probably... did I do the math wrong? Q3, 1, 2, 3. No, yeah, there's going to be one more after LA before Radiance. And then Radiance is probably... Maybe we're getting one for Radiance at the end of the year, maybe not. And I think what's going to happen is going to be pretty interesting. So right now, Bologna is exerting a lot of pressure on the market for cards, and I think people are racing to get their decks. And Unleashed is likely to do this as well. And there is a chance that the Sydney... It is the Sydney one, right? I am like not going crazy. Yeah, Sydney might be like really... It's a bit further from a lot of NA and EU players, although it will presumably bring in a lot of APAC players and probably some China players as well. But it's likely to be on top of the next set release. So we're likely to see another like set 1, like first event that's going to be, I think, determined a bit by access to cards as well. And also it's going to be the first one where we're going to get 2 North American, 1 EU, and 1 APAC, or if you want to talk about like rest of the globe really, event. Notably, we have no South American events for this year, which is a bit intense. My understanding is that Brazil is a really large market, so I'm surprised that they're not being served, especially because in Legends of Runeterra, Brazil fielded a ton of amazing players. And then we're moving on to Vendetta. And once again, we have an EU, an APAC, and an NA event. So we're going to get like some pretty global events, all things considered. It would be better if we had more, obviously, but this is what we get. You are somewhat likely to run into me at the Vancouver event, depending on how finances shake out. We'll see. But what I think is interesting is there's an interweaving of set releases and access to product with events. And I really want to show, like, it's going to feel like the Tom Cruise sprinting meme, which is like everyone is going to run from their stores. You're going to be like canvassing the whole city and like TCG Player or Card Market or whatever you use to get your cards for these events, book flights, get onto the events, go to these places. And for everybody who's not going to these places, you're probably going to go through something let's like a junior version of this because you're also going to be fighting with these players to get card stock. My understanding is that Spirit Forge is going a bit better than Origins did, but it's still going to be a high pressure environment, I think, for this year. I would be, like I reserve the right to change this if the timing between the set releases and the first regional goes from being like a week to 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But I doubt that that's going to be the case given how many events there are and how the releases are timed. And in all of this, we still have the discussion of like purple cards are a problem. So as long as purple cards remain a problem, I think this is going to exert like enormous pressure on one color and decks that access that one color, and it's going to create like some pretty skewed prices. If you're looking at any of the Spirit Forge stuff, like Ezreal and Seals are still crazy expensive, and a lot of the other stuff is like cratering in price, which is great for consumers, but creates some issues for like accessing, good decks. And so I think a more even meta would serve us all. Among this, there's also the question of bans or intervention into the meta. This is obviously a response that Dave Tron was giving to sort of the ban Draven discourse. And I think the things that are interesting now are the archetype dominance and game breaking combo thing, like vectors. Those are probably going to pop up at Bologna. But I think negative player sentiment and event attendance are going to be like something to watch out for. So if this becomes like an issue at local events, you're going to start seeing less people going to Nexus nights, playing more kitchen table, Riftbound, or going to like like modified deck events as opposed to full constructed. And this might also have some impact on skirmishes as well if people are feeling pretty hopeless and can't access certain cards. So there is a non-zero chance that there will be intervention. Now, question is when should there be good intervention? I talked about this in an episode not too long ago. People have different answers to this. I think it's going to be really incumbent on the company to keep an eye on the event stats from Bologna and Vegas, which are, like super close back to back. But there's also another CCS event coming up and a PPG one. So there's going to be stats to look at. But I suspect that Draven is only one part of the discussion, and that really what we need is a discussion about purple as a color. Despite the game being young, I'm much more on the side of strong intervention now to set the direction right for the next couple of sets. Yeah, and sort of the thing that I want to land on is somebody commented, I think, on my meta video that the real meta is getting access to product, and I think that's factually true. I think the access to product, the pricing structure, and the timing of these tournaments relative to set release are going to generate a lot of pressure points relative to the tournament environment and really access to cards. And I think that's consequently is going to lead to balance interventions or at least demand for them. So it's going to be an interesting year. I'm excited for all the sets, and I'm excited for Spirit Forge too, quite honestly. I am currently sleeving an Azir deck, so I'm not like a doomer or anything, but I think it's important to really pay attention to the discussion around card pricing, print, access to them, all the discussions about scalping. All these are super valid discussions. I don't really cover them on this channel, but I think they're really relevant. And I think I'm gonna hammer this like every time I get a chance. This is like my base superstructure Marxism discussion. I think we experience this game as like a cultural phenomenon, but there is like a material base to this that is important to keep track of, and it's already a problem, and I would like it to not continue to be one, or at least to be mitigated in the future. On a less serious note, the one thing I can tell you for the rest of the year for me is I'm living in the Pantheon waiting room. This is really like the one thing I want to see this year. I would be lying if I didn't say that I'm probably gonna like go all out and get my overnumbered Pantheon as soon as it's released. And I pray it's not a garbage deck. But that's really like the thing that's like driving me forward in terms of card identification. Otherwise, I'm gonna be playing the things that I think are fun. And if I do try for skirmishes this set, then I'm probably on Draven unless something changes. And we will see for Vancouver. Maybe Lille too, but you know, we'll see what the prices are like to get to France from where I am right now, which is in Montreal. All right, that's it for today. And I want to mention that the next episode is going to be the Draven in Focus. I think I'm going to do what I did not do in set one, and I'm just going to I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off, and I'm going to start with the big deck. If for no other reason, then I would like players to understand what Draven is doing and how to play against it. And next week, I'm going to be talking about flavor design. It's time. I'm ready to talk about colors. And this is where I get to deploy a lot of my my own work. So that's the plan for the next two episodes. Probably Thursday for the in focus. Trying to figure out the schedule still with some work demands that are piling up. Anyways, thank you so much, and hopefully you are not getting clobbered by Draven. See you next time.